Travels and Traditions with Burt Wolfe is a classic travel journal, a record of Burt's search for information about our world and how we fit into it. Burt travels to the source of each story, trying to find the connections between our history and what is happening today. What he discovers can improve our lives and our understanding of the world around us. And of course, there's always Burt's slightly irreverent sense of humor.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Oh, my goodness. We're going to need a bigger can. No matter how rich and famous, you don't always get to choose where you go to work. Humphrey Bogart was at the height of his success when he starred in The African Queen and spent months in extraordinarily uncomfortable spots in the Congo and Uganda. And Katherine Hepburn's accommodations weren't exactly fit for a queen.
Filmed in the treacherous wilds of Africa.
During the early years of the 20th century, Stephen Birch was one of the wealthiest men in America. At one point, he owned 15% of the world's copper and founded the Kennecott Corporation.
In the great gold rush, Alaska was the hope and dream of wave-worn men.
He was one of thousands of people who hoped to make their fortune in Alaska. Most were looking for gold. Birch found his fortune in copper. I've looked at hundreds of period photographs of miners in Alaska, and I can't find a single face that's smiling. Birch didn't smile much in Alaska either, but as soon as he joined the ranks of the millionaires, he moved to New York City, and his disposition improved, but not that much. As soon as these people became rich and famous, they wanted to move to a place where they could hang out with other people who were rich and famous. May not have been their primary residence, but it was the place where they felt most at home. And that was particularly true for their vacation homes. In England, it was Brighton, which became popular because doctors began promoting the medical benefits of seawater. The doctors built magnificent facilities to accommodate their royal and upper-class patients, and the moneyed families built spectacular homes. Queen Victoria and her family stayed at their royal pavilion. At about the same time, in the United States, the place to build your vacation home was Newport, Rhode Island.
President and Mrs. Eisenhower were among the many who witnessed the start of Newport, Rhode Island.
And it was the perfect neighborhood for folks who wanted to sail around on their boats. Newport was fine for a few months during the summer, but what if you were looking for a place for the winter or all year round? Welcome to... Henry Morrison Flagler was the founder of the Standard Oil Company, which made him one of the wealthiest men in America. In 1883, Flagler's doctor advised him to spend the winter in Florida, suggesting that it might improve Mrs. Flagler's health. The more time Flagler spent in Florida, the more he liked it. But he was not happy with the hotel accommodations or the transportation system. Although he stayed on the board of directors of Standard Oil, he gave up his day-to-day involvement in the company to follow up on his interests in Florida. He built a number of hotels that met his idea of what a hotel should be. To make it easier for his friends in the North to visit his hotels, he built the Florida East Coast Railway. It took an enormous effort to cut through the wilderness and reach the Palm Beaches. Even then, it was difficult to drain the swamp. He built the 1,100-room Royal Ponciana Hotel on the shores of Lake Worth in Palm Beach. At the time, the Royal Ponciana Hotel was the largest wooden structure in the world. 2 years later, Flagler built the Palm Beach Inn, overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. In 1902, he renamed it the Breakers. Soon people who were staying at the Royal Ponciana began asking for rooms near the beach, where the ocean waves were breaking on the shore. In 1902, Flagler built a nice little place for himself and named it Whitehall. It was a wedding present to his new wife. Whitehall established the Palm Beaches as the place to be for the winter. These days, the 75-room mansion is the Flagler Museum, and it's listed as a National Historical Monument. This is the Grand Hall, covering about 5,000 square feet. It's the largest room in the house. As a matter of fact, when it was built, it was the largest room in any private house in the United States. And this is the drawing room, the room that Mrs. Flagler spent most of her time in. To the best of my knowledge, Mrs. Flagler didn't actually draw. In fact, she didn't even doodle. During the 1500s, the homes of the wealthy in England had a private room where the owners could meet with their friends. It was known as the withdrawing room, and they would withdraw to it. Eventually, the with was dropped, and it was just called the drawing room. And then later, the drawing room became the living room. Next to the museum is a pavilion, where visitors can come and tour Mr. Flagler's private railroad car. There was a sitting room where he could entertain his guests or do a little business, kind of a home office. This was one of the rail cars he brought to the Palm Beaches to celebrate the opening of his railroad. And then there was Addison Meisner. Meisner was an architect who developed the Mediterranean Revival and Spanish Colonial Revival styles. Both architectural styles became central to the architecture of the Palm Beaches. During the 1920s, Meisner was the most famous living architect in the United States, which raises the question, who were the most famous dead architects in the United States? But I'll get back to you on that later. Meisner believed that architects should include the interior, furniture, and garden design as part of their work. He set up a factory to manufacture the components he needed. He taught local workmen to make Spanish-style red roof tiles, which were perfectly suited to the weather of the Palm Beaches. Meisner never got around to building his own dream castle, but he described it as a castle in Spain during the 12th century. It had been built, but then someone came along and took it over and built it a second time. And then a third group came by and changed it again. Speaking of change, I would hate to see the change orders on that building. Meisner's father had been an American diplomat who spent a number of years in Guatemala, and the younger Meisner was influenced by the colonial Spanish architecture that he saw there. He also loved the architecture of southern Spain, especially the Alhambra. His Mediterranean Revival designs were perfect for his wealthy clients who wanted to build their oceanfront castles. Constructed of stone, tile, and stucco, his buildings were better suited to Florida's semi-tropical climate than the wooden resort architecture in the Northeast. It was Meisner's architecture that transformed the Palm Beaches. He designed with the wealthy in mind. They built fantastic, huge private homes. More than anyone else, he was responsible for turning the Palm Beaches into the resort community in the United States. The houses had courtyards on different levels. He was into exposed rafters and vaulted ceilings, tiled pools and mosaics. Meisner wanted his properties to look authentically old. He'd take a hammer and chip the stone. He'd take a knife and carve holes into the wood. He'd pour acid on the iron to make it rust. He'd walk around on wet cement with spiked shoes. He was giving it the kiss of the centuries. Meisner's first major Florida commission was the Everglades Club. It was originally intended as a World War I hospital, but by the time it opened in 1918, it was repurposed as a private club. Another building called the Bounty of Warhouse was built in 1923 for Rodman Wanamaker of the Wanamaker department store fortune. In 1933, it was purchased by Joseph Kennedy and eventually became President John F. Kennedy's Winter White House. I don't actually see myself ending up in a Meisner home, but I have visited Meisner Park. Took over the business and built it into one of the world's biggest food companies. She liked buying other food companies, including Jell-O, Baker's Chocolate, and Maxwell House Coffee. One evening at a dinner party, she discovered that the duck she was eating had been frozen before it was cooked. Fascinated by the idea of food being frozen, she tracked down Clarence Birdseye and eventually bought his company. In 1929, the company name was changed to General Foods, and Marjorie became the wealthiest woman in America. Clearly, she needed a place in the Palm Beaches, and so she built, stand back, here it comes. MaraLago was built in 1924. The name is a Spanish phrase meaning sea to lake. It is a reference to the fact that the resort extends the entire width of Palm Beach, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Intercoastal Waterway. The house had 58 bedrooms, 33 bathrooms, a 29-foot-long marble-top dining table, and 12 fireplaces. And most interesting, 3 bomb shelters. Question is, who got which shelter? Was there like a first-class shelter for Marjorie and the others were less spectacular? Inquiring minds need to know. When Marjorie died in 1973, she left the property to the National Park Service, hoping it would be used for state visits or as a winter White House. But because the cost of maintaining the property exceeded the funds provided by Post, it was never used. And it was difficult to secure the place. It's located on the flight path of the Palm Beach Airport. So in 1981, by an act of Congress, the property was returned to the Post Foundation. Marjorie also had a nice boat named the Sea Cloud. She kept it in the Palm Beaches. These days, MaraLago is owned by Donald Trump and operates as a private club. And of course, the Astors had to have a place in the neighborhood. John Jacob Astor was born in Germany in 1724. John and his brother George were flute makers who moved to England and then to Baltimore, Maryland. At one point, they moved to New York City and focused on New York City real estate. By the mid-1800s, the Astors were one of the wealthiest families in the United States. In New York, they liked to build hotels. They built the Waldorf Astoria, the Knickerbocker, and the St. Regis. But over the years, they began spending much of their time at their home in the Palm Beaches. In 1912, a descendant of the original John Jacob Astor was on his way to becoming one of America's most talented businessmen when he died on the Titanic. For over 100 years, the Palm Beaches have been attracting people who were rich and famous. In the beginning, it was primarily industrialists, but eventually it became a very attractive spot for people in the entertainment business. Burt Reynolds' relationship with the Palm Beaches goes back to 1946, when his family moved here and his father became the chief of police in Riviera Beach. He was a star football player at Palm Beach High School and continued playing football at Florida State University. But because he kept getting injured, he had to stop. In college, he was given a part in a play, but only considered acting as something to do during the summer because it was less physically demanding than most other jobs. While working in summer stock theater in Hyde Park, New York, he met Joanne Woodward, who helped him find an agent. Woodward later said that she didn't think she actually ever saw him perform. She knew him as this cute, shy, attractive boy. He had the kind of lovely personality that made you want to do something for him. He worked on Gunsmoke and a series of films, but his biggest hits were the Smokey and the Bandit movies.
And how they all took to the road one day for a quiet little drive in the country. From Georgia to Texas and back in 28 hours flat with a truckload of bootleg beer.
Bandit, I've got a smoking report for you.
Reynolds filmed many of his movies in Florida, including Semi-Tough, Striptease, and Smokey and the Bandit 2. His home was in Jupiter. In 1990, Seline Dion released her first song in English. At the time, I was working in Canada, shooting a program about Quebec. We were in a town called Charlevoix, and our producer suggested that we shoot a segment about the young singer whose family lived nearby. Her name was Seline Dion, and I spent some time talking to her manager, René Angeline. René said he was moved to tears by Dion's voice and decided to make her a star. He actually mortgaged his own home to get the necessary funds for her recording. It became a great success, and she became a star in Quebec. The more René talked to me about Seline, the more I could see his true admiration for her. In 1994, they were married. I don't think I have ever seen a couple more in love, present company excluded. Seline became one of the best-selling artists of all time, with record sales of over 200 million copies worldwide. Jimmy Buffett developed a music style that combines a little country, a little folk, a little pop, and lots of laid-back lifestyle. It's sometimes called Gulf and Western. The most famous example is Margaritaville. Buffett has also been involved in a number of charities.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Buffett. Save the Manatee Club has helped to protect imperiled manatees and their aquatic habitat for decades.
In 1981, the Save the Manatee Club was founded by Buffett and the former Florida governor, Bob Graham. It is the world's leading organization for the protection of manatees. You can never tell what's going to inspire an artist to create a work, and that is especially true of Buffett. He once owned a Grumman HU-16 airplane. In 1996, Jimmy, along with Bono's family, and record producer Chris Blackwell, were landing along the coast of Jamaica. Suddenly, the Jamaican police started shooting at the plane. They thought it was smuggling marijuana. The windshield was blown out, but nobody was hurt. Later, Bono said that he was terrified. He felt he had been trapped in a James Bond movie. As soon as the government of Jamaica realized their mistake, they apologized, and Buffett used the experience as the basis for a song which he titled Jamaica Mistaka.
Come back.
Buffett has been a Florida resident for many years and is presently using his knowledge of the area and his knowledge of the process of aging to develop a group of retirement communities here in Florida. Cheeseburgers in Paradise. While we were researching famous people who came to live in the Palm Beaches, we came across a place where many of them like to eat. It's the Okeechobee Steakhouse. Since it opened in 1947, it's been run by the same family, 3 generations of the Lewises. At the end of our meal, I wanted to express my appreciation of their talent. Accordingly, I sent them the following email.
I'll be back. I'll be back.
I'll be back.
Well, that's a look at how the Palm Beaches got started and eventually became the place where the rich and famous wanted to spend their winters. People like the Astors, the Kennedys, Burt Reynolds, Seline Dion, and Jimmy Buffett. In part 2 of this program, we'll take a look at other famous people that have resided in the Palm Beaches: Rod Stewart, Jack Nicklaus, and Venus and Serena Williams. We'll take a look at an art form that's always in motion, and we'll find out how NASCAR racing got started. I hope you will join us. For Travels and Traditions, I'm Burt Wolfe.
Play it again, Sam, for old time's sake.
You must remember this.
Good idea. If you'd like to see this program again, or any of the hundreds of programs we've made for our public broadcasting stations, or see the material that was great, but we couldn't fit it into the program, you can see it all on BurtWolfe.com or YouTube Burt Wolfe. This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.